Hello. So, um, yeah, I guess a lot of you know no dig, and maybe how many of you are practicing no dig at the moment? Oh, wow. Okay. Uh, well, how many are not practicing no dig? Okay, cool. So I won't spend much time explaining the basics of it, more about where it can lead and the fantastic um, consequences you can get from where it takes you. That's for me. I'm basing this on my journey, which is when I started out, I didn't really know what I was doing in terms of what no dig was. This was in 1982, 3. In 1982, I decided to become a market grower, and I'd grown up on a farm, so I had access to land from the farm, and it was a field of permanent pasture, so it was a really good start. Stony Cotswold brash, very stony soil. And at that time, I didn't know about cardboard. That's something I developed as a mulching method from 2007. So at the time, was wondering how to break the pasture, how to create a soil that I could grow plants in, vegetables. And it so happened I'd been working on a market garden in Wales. Charlie Waitress, I don't know if any of you remember him, he's going back a bit now. He sadly died in the 90s, but he was a London refugee from the 70s, friends of Patrick Holden, Peter Seger, all that crowd. And he was using a German system developed by a guy called Hans Kemmick. And the idea was to aerate the soil with frequent passes of quite deep tines. And Charlie really swore by it, and he felt it was just the thing to improve his pretty marginal soil. And I liked what I saw there. I wasn't thinking about no dig at that time. And so when I started my market garden on acre and a half, 6,000 square meters in August 1982, I borrowed a Chemic machine from a neighbor who happened to have one, who I knew. And I was driving it up and down through the permanent pasture. I was starting to wonder, how is this going to kill the grass and weeds? And then my father came out, who was a farmer all his life, very, very experienced, hard-bitten farmer who'd been through World War II and survived, or actually even more pertinently, he'd been through the Depression of the 1930s and survived that. It was a really hard time for farming. And so he didn't stand any nonsense. He was a man of few words as well. When he saw me doing that, he said, "You want to get the rotavator." And so I thought, well, it's actually, we didn't have much communication. He literally was a man of very few words. So when he said something, I really paid attention. And I went and got the rotavator. And that's the tractor mounted rotavator. Rotavated the pasture 4 times. It was a dry, late August, early September. I also got a manure spreader, spread quite a few tons of cow manure from the farm. And that was the beginning of my market gardening career. And it went amazingly well. And I was mulching. I started off with mulching because that felt to me like this is the way to go. What I'd seen the autumn before when I did my research, and my research was not going to college, it was seeing what other people are doing. I feel that's the best way to learn, and to learn from their mistakes. I don't really mean that in a negative way, but you can see the bits of it that could work for you and the bits that you don't want to do. And I could see very clearly there was a big problem for most market gardens, actually organic, was weeds, and they were not on top of them, and it was causing them some grief. So I thought, right, it has to be mulching. And I found a book by a lady called Ruth Stout, American gardener, mulching with hay. So I bought a load of old hay, mulched about an acre of ground with hay, not all of it. And thought, right, that's it. And pathways with straw, which I could get for free in those days. And the result was indeed no weeds. It was also very few crops because slugs hiding under the hay and the straw like massacre the next spring. And I went back to Ruth Stout's book, which had inspired me, and I could see there was no mention of slugs because she's in a dry climate. So one thing that taught me was be careful where you take your advice from. Is it appropriate to your situation? And then from there, that led me to compost because basically I thought, what am I going to do with all this old hay? Over a period of a few months, I turned most of it into compost. It still had weed seeds, but that was okay. I could deal with that. And gradually my system evolved along those lines. But all through the 1980s, I was doing this, no dig, market gardening using compost mulch and straw in the pathways still because it was free. And I gave quite a few presentations. I was on BBC Gardener's World for a whole program in 1988. I never once mentioned no dig, partly because the phrase didn't exist in those days. It's quite a new phrase, which with Steph, my partner at the time, we developed in 2015. People would say things like not digging, which kind of says it, but it's not quite such a convenient turn of phrase. And yeah, we took it from there, and I started talking about no dig a lot, but it still was not really gaining huge traction until I was asked to write a book by Dowding called Charles Dowding's Masterclass of Growing Vegetables. That was in lockdown 2020. I wrote that through 2021. And just before it came out, I said to Dowding guys, so can you just confirm the title of this book, please? And they said, yeah, it's No Dig. Okay. So they'd realized the incredible commercial possibilities from no dig as a phrase, and how that could interest so many people, and that's where we are now. It's fantastic and fascinating. But what it hasn't solved is the question of how growing vegetables as a market gardener, which is still I would call it my main profession. I do probably about half my working time is out in the market garden, or it certainly is in the summer, maybe 10% in the winter when I do extra writing work. But I'm working really hard on all the other sides of what I do, which is I want to get it out there. And so social media, videos, writing books. I'm just writing my 16th book at the moment, which is companion planting and interplanting. That's coming out next March. So I'm working hard on that. But the bit that gives me the most joy and the most heart is growing the vegetables. And I want it to be profitable. It bugs me if I'm growing vegetables and they're not getting what I would call a fair price. And I can see the difficulty, because you could put it another way. You could say, well, actually, who out there in the general public wants to pay what we would find a fair price, which means that will remunerate us for the time we put in? It's almost an impossible one to solve, actually. And the conclusion I've come to is that for a small scale market gardener, I would say on an acre or less, you need some kind of secondary income to take the pressure off. If it's I mean, I hope there's people here who would disagree with that. But over many years, you could work really hard and really hard and really hard on just getting income from selling vegetables, and that's what I was doing in the 80s, actually, and it did kind of wear me down a bit in the end, and I was a lot younger then. So what I'm looking at partly today is, with no dig, you can get more from less ground. That's one of the beauties of it. And when people are starting no dig, I'm always saying start small. And it's so relevant to that lovely book, Small is Beautiful, by Schumacher. Have any of you read that book out of interest? Oh, yeah, very few. I mean, it's dated now in a way, 1970s, but like any really good book, it's timeless, because the core message is still totally true. And Schumacher sadly died on a train in the Alps, and all on his own in a rail carriage in the 80s, sometime in the 80s. But before that, he'd done a lot of work with the Soil Association. He was promoting organic. And so was I back in the 80s. And organic was the thing that we were really keen to push. And we had a slogan in the 1980s, 20% by 2000. 20% of British farmland organic by 2000. Well, we've gone a long way beyond 2000 now, and look where we are. It's certainly nothing like 20%. And that links to another conclusion I've come to, which is that these big initiatives, top-down programs, ideas, methods, initiated, sponsored by government will always be there to make fantastic promises and do very little. And we heard a lot of that through the 80s, 90s, and noughties, and so on. What is changing things, I feel now, is what most of you and me are doing, which is doing it on the ground and the ripple effect outwards from that. So I would say take heart from, even if it's not paying your wage, that's the one of the things that really keeps me going is the knowing that this is making a difference. And the more people all of us can connect with, because community connections, I think, are stronger than we realize. And through friendship, talking, uh, putting the energy out there. Uh, Energy is something I've come to realize is really important, and we can use it in our growing. And what does that mean? Uh, it's such a vague term. I've written this book, New Energies for Gardening, came out in January. It's quite a short book. There's a lot in there, a lot of knowledge which I feel could help a lot of growers, because it's about very simple, very cheap things that all of us can do that don't actually take a lot of time. So they're simple and cheap, and that's why you'll never hear about them. Because the way the world works now is ideas, initiatives that result in a product which can be sold. That means you've got advertising potential income to be made, like um, articles in magazines. Magazines need advertising revenue. Before the internet came along, I was really struggling to get word out there and spread what I know, which I know can help, as I know can help millions of people. I can see it now. But that is how I feel that the change can happen. So, any of you with social media, which opens another can of worms actually, but the social media for me has been brilliant because it's adding value to no dig growing, for one thing. Like when I'm selling produce, I don't call it organic. I can't actually. Ashamed to say I'm not organic approved. I was back in the 80s. I felt more relevant than I was selling to supermarkets as well, which is when it does have more relevance because nobody knows you in a supermarket. So if you've got that logo on your produce, it really counts. But if you're selling from farm shop, I don't know if I should say this here actually, but if people know you, then they trust you, and you don't need to have a certification symbol from a third-party body. What I put on my label is no dig, because I feel that actually says at least as much as the word organic. Because if you're no dig, you're not going to go plastering your field and plants with any kind of synthetic poison. You just, because that's going to kill things. And soil life, this is the bit that until recently has been massively ignored. So when I started organic growing, the common way to control weeds was using a rotavator. This is organic, approved. And looking back on it now, I think, well, there was a lot of talk about saving wildlife and using no synthetic chemicals, no weed killer and so on. But everyone was happily cultivating the soil. And then I went to a lecture by a very eminent professor of soil, and he said, it's organic soil management. He said, the soil is like a bank balance. Nutrients in, nutrients out. I just thought, God, this can't be right. That's like hydroponic growing. That's looking at the soil as like a rock wool medium. So that's where we've come from in terms of gaining understanding now. At last, there's appreciation of and discussion about biology in the soil. Most of it we can't see with the naked eye, so that's why microscopes are brilliant. I saw someone have one over there. It's really, really good to see them being used now a bit more. It's amazing what you see when you look at something, even 9 times magnification. A guy came to my garden not long ago, and he had an ordinary camera. He put a 9 times lens on, and he could see springtails. I don't know if any of you have seen a springtail sort of, large enough to actually recognize it. They're beautiful little creatures. They look like furry little cats hopping around with prick up ears and very alert. And that's all just 1/1,000,000th of what's going on in the soil out of sight. So we can ignore it if we want to, but that's what we can preserve with no dig, which means basically minimal disturbance of soil. It's not a religion. It's not like thou shalt not dig. And that, it does get that interpretation sometimes. So it's about being practical about it, but just not doing any unnecessary cultivation. And from that, then you start thinking about the biology that you're not disturbing. Well, it needs to feed. And there's 2 ways of doing that. The one I use mostly is compost mulch. What is compost? It's anything more than half decomposed. So it doesn't have to be perfect compost. So this can cause grief, I know, for a lot of gardeners because they maybe got used to the idea of buying compost in a sack and it all looks very perfect and even. Our homemade compost, farm scale, it can be quite woody, like what Tolly's making here and using wood chip, that kind of thing. There's a lot of value in that. I had a guy come on a compost making course I gave about 2 years ago, and he was really grumpy at the beginning. He clearly didn't want to be there. He'd been sent along by his employer. And we were going around the garden looking at my compost. And at the end, he looked really perky, and he said, "Guy," he said, "I've been making good compost all along." Because he'd been so judging what he'd been making. He just got the wrong idea. And there are so many wrong ideas out there. This is where I might exceed. I've got to, but thanks. Yeah, we've been fed so many lies, not intentional, I may say, but just misunderstandings. And it's the origin, it's how propaganda works. If someone says something, often enough, most people believe it without even realizing that they've been deceived. But again, I'm saying it's not necessarily intentional. It's just in the gardening world, which I know more than growing world, this happens so much. And because people hear like, "Oh, you can't put bindweed roots on a compost heap." Well, you can actually. Yeah, I know from experience. But if the belief becomes deeply ingrained, because what happens is these beliefs go into the subconscious mind, which is actually running us. It programs your behavior. Little do you know, me too. That's something to think about and work on. Find out what's actually driving your system of beliefs, and find new ones that actually really work for you and pay. I mean, I would say in the organic world, really strong belief is about rotation. I'm not saying rotation is wrong, but I found that with no dig, healthy, super healthy soil, it's much less important. So that does, that knowledge frees you up. With second plantings like we're still doing at the moment, succession planting, you can put in anything anywhere pretty much, wherever there's a space. So in my market garden, I'm very much looking to have crops growing all the time. And that goes back to the second way of feeding the soil is through photosynthesis, which is leaves turning sun energy into carbon in the plant, then into the soil, which they get into the soil by feeding roots, the mycelial network, bacteria also. That's rhizophagy. If you haven't heard of that one, do look it up. And that's a system in healthy soil, which is all the billions of organisms in the soil helping plant roots to go. But they need carbon food, carbon emissions coming down through the plant. And they're sometimes called sugars. I mean, sugars are carbon, it's carbohydrates, food. So that's bringing fertility into the soil. So I would say, even when you're growing vegetables, you are growing green manures or cover crops. I look on vegetables as a cover crop. How about that? That's a slightly unusual statement, I would say. But it opens the door to many more possibilities, and you don't have to sacrifice some of your growing area because you could grow something that you can actually eat as well that's going to feed the soil. And then another misunderstanding, I would say, is that we've got to have living roots in the soil every month of the year. I quite often hear that. When that's more in the regenerative, which I think should be called generative, by the way. If regenerating, you're standing still, you need to actually generate. That's another word. We need to change a lot of the vocabulary, like conventional. I was saying to Pete earlier, wrong word. It needs to be chemical because if you're not organic, well, what does organic mean as well? But yeah, no dig has led me to questioning everything and then opening the door to what I call new energies, which is, for example, I run my water from the tap before going on the plants. It goes through a magnetic field, very simple devices you can buy, £50. And the crops hydrate more readily. The quality is higher. The growth, I've never seen such healthy growth, partly this year because we've had sunshine, but I've been doing this for 3 years now. It's really, really fantastic tool that's available. Just a small investment, no moving parts. Installation time, 1 second. There's certain things you can really like. One of those devices on the pipe into your house will soften your water. What not to like about that? It'll save you a lot of money in central heating bills, having no fur in the pipes and that kind of thing. 6 weeks after I put this device on my pipe into my house, my kettle descaled. It's whoa. And so 5 sticks around your property to warm them up, that takes 20 minutes. That warms your ground for a year ahead. That's all in my little book there. That's an old one discovered by daffodil farmers in the Isles of Scilly in the 1970s, 80s, and affirmed by experimentation down there. All of these methods that are very simple, very cheap. Even the stirring the water, which has kind of been, I was going to say hijacked, it's not really the word, but that's become part of biodynamic practice. That was being done long before Steiner developed the biodynamic practices in the 1920s, only 100 years ago. The medieval peasants in Europe were doing what they called Tonsen singing. They were stirring water and singing. And that's putting sound energy into water. And then you come back to water and the amazing quality and power of water and how water has memory, water can hold energy. You can put that energy in the water that you stir for an hour, making vortices backwards and forwards. Vortex is a really powerful formative energy force. And put that on your land, flick it on, and I'll sign off on this. It's intention. What you put into that water is what we can all use at no cost to us or the environment. Intention, your intent, your desire for your plants to grow more and grow more healthily, and for your soul to be more fertile and more healthy and vibrant and alive. Thank you.
Thank you.
I've only spoken for 25 minutes.
No, you started at 1:15. Well, just after.
Half past. I thought it seemed brief.
Oh, is it 1:30? I'm sorry. Yes, no, okay. I'm so sorry, I was thinking.
Yeah. No, I want to allow time for questions, but there was. Drink some magnetic water. Yeah, so water. If I talk about this on YouTube, I get into trouble. I get a chorus of comments saying, what are you going on about? Water is just H2O, end of story. And I feel that's one of the biggest issues actually we have at the moment is how people have been dumbed down. They've been discouraged from questioning anything. They've been taught to believe that everything the teacher said at school is the final truth. And I see this as a serious problem because if enough people don't wake up, that can drag everything down. The sheer weight of that energy of quite negative thoughts. And that's where if we can get more of our food out there with this kind of message, we need to inspire and encourage lots more people. And recently, I'm sure you've heard the discoveries of the links between the gut and the soil. I mean, how many people are aware of that and the two biomes being quite interlinked? Oh yeah, brilliant. Yeah, that's encouraging. So I mean, that didn't used to be mentioned or discussed. My mother used to say to me, "You should eat a peck of soil in your lifetime," and she'd just say that in a casual way because her mother said it to her, and so on. But I don't think she realised that a peck is, I think it's 1/8 of a bushel. It's about 9 liters. It's a lot of soil, and I love saying this to children. Actually, I sometimes do talks to sort of primary school age because that kind of thing that really gets them going. Whoa! And then all the parents and teachers there saying, "Oh!" So the reason is that the soil biome is so similar to the microbiome in our gut, and many nutritionists are now having fantastic results for healing people by bringing them into contact with soil either through eating fresh, unwashed even, but certainly not too clean food, and also being in a garden. There's a GP in Devon, for example, Susan. She's can't remember her. She's on Instagram, and it's about healing people with gardening. So she's a doctor, and she gets people after she's done the doctor session with her to go out in the garden and even work with her. And she's building up a good following both there and on social media. People who are realizing the benefits of these connections. And we are fortunate in that respect. That's where we need to count our blessings, because working out in a garden, in a farm, we're in contact with a lot of these microbes. There's one called Bacillum vacca, for example, which is a bacteria that it'll be in this room. It's around wherever soil and plants are nearby, and our bodies need it to make serotonin. For me, that's a really convincing little explanation to give somebody for why it's good to be in a garden and grow your own food. It's not only about the end result of the food; it's about the process. And the more health we can have, the more our brain will work, because the gut's such a key organ that has until recently been ignored. I'm using commonly quoted figures here. Quarter of our brain is in our gut, and 80% of our immune system is in our gut. I mean, think about that. That's so significant. And then you look around in a big city and you see how unhealthy people that, I probably shouldn't say that, but to my eyes anyway, they're kind of not sparky, slumbering along. And I feel that's, you know, I'm a bit of a conspiracy theorist, but I don't really like that word. But, just understanding, I would say it's more about understanding why things are. And it's hard to understand it sometimes without thinking about it's got to be, what's the motivation for making people so unhealthy and so poor as well in monetary terms? And then they have to go and buy junk food. And by the time you've got them in that place, they're never going to break out of it because they can't, their brains kind of stop working. You feed them football on the television, all this kind of thing. It's all, I think it's all kind of planned in a horribly invisible way. And when I start talking about this kind of thing on social media, I had to be really careful because I get what's called shadow banned. Some of you will know that term, where they basically stop putting your posts onto other people's feed like they were before. So you kind of disappear from public space without anything being said and without anyone kind of knowing. Maybe they just think, oh, he's gone quiet for a while, or forget about me. And that, for me, that's really dangerous. We are censored, actually, much more than we know by this kind of thing. I've talked in the world of social media with a lot of very prominent gardening influencers, the modern word, and I said to them, so what do you feel about the trails in the sky and this kind of thing? And they say, yeah, we're as concerned as you are, but we can't say it because we know we'll be kind of pushed down the line and made invisible, not literally. And so that is going on without anybody knowing. I find that really, really difficult. And somehow that's why it comes back to what I was saying about community, people, and that thing of being together. Uh, that was another aspect of lockdown. We were deprived of that, but when coming out of it, it made me realize the value of this kind of thing. I love being able to connect with so many people and share these kinds of thoughts and knowledge. Because soon after lockdown, I was giving a talk in Inverness, and in the room there were 18 people. And so it was like 2 years since I'd experienced that feeling of a decent number of people in a room together. You could say, oh boy, the energy in that room was just wonderful. And that I feel is so uplifting, and that kind of energy can go out there. That's where I feel we can all of us make a difference, from just being here now. And if we're all thinking along the same lines, these really positive thoughts of health, um, making the world more healthy, more people more motivated, uh, desire to see a beautiful world as well. Beauty is another really important word that's been taken out of science because it's not objective. We need to get the subjectivity back in so much of what we do, and don't be afraid to try things in your garden or market garden just because they're not current or somebody said it doesn't work or whatever it might be. Follow your gut feelings about what you really want to do, what you feel is the most valuable thing to do, and that doesn't necessarily mean valuable in monetary terms. Something I've realized through my life is that the hard decisions are actually the ones that don't pay. that things you want to do, but they're not going to bring you anything monetary. And we've been so much, that word value. What does it mean? It's been so much taken over by money, but finding the value in things also that are not money. And what I found is finding value in what places I hadn't expected, and meeting people and helping people in other ways that are not remunerating in money wise, but give me a huge amount in return. And maybe that's more of the way we can go. Somehow we got to. And I just hope there's no one in this room who's feeling a bit despairing about market gardening, so because that's what a lot of us are doing because of the financial difficulties. And I totally agree with you about that. It's financially horrible at the moment, but maybe you find a way around that a bit. But keep up with some kind of second string to your bow. So have a bit of something else that gives you actually a bit of money. But beyond that, keep going with this kind of motivational feeling and urging other people to engage in a positive, practical way with the world that inspires. Try not to be critical of people, but to inspire many people. Thank you. Second.
Well done for picking up when I rudely interrupted you in the middle. I'm very, very sorry. But we still do have, yeah, a good 25 minutes for questions, and I'm sure there are many, many questions and many thoughts provoked by that talk. So, who'd like to start up with the first question? Can you all say your name and where you're from, please, when you ask a question?
Tim Mitchell, Aston Manor, Kitchen Garden. I was really intrigued when you mentioned about the medieval peasants using this, doing this water stirring. Where did you find that? Where did you find that information?
Let me think now. Tonsensingen. It was in. There's a wonderful book called Living Energies, and it's written by a guy called Callum Coates, and he was writing about Victor Schauberger. If you haven't heard about Victor Schauberger, do look him up. And if any of you are using copper tools, he's the guy who invented them in the modern context. They're actually bronze, they're 5% tin to give it strength. But the book Living Energies is quite a heavy read, not as heavy as Rudolf Steiner. And you will find in that book a lot of value. You can come back to it time and again. I'll just quickly say about Victor Schauberger, he's an example of someone who discovered things by daring to go outside the box, one might say. And what he did was he'd go for walks in the forest. He was in the Austrian Alps. It's amazing how many good things come out of the Austrian Alps. So he'd go for a walk and he'd ask the water to enter his consciousness, the consciousness of water. He kind of unified with it in some way. I don't know how, but he got incredible understandings about water from that. And that this was one of the examples mentioned. He went and found a farmer who was renowned in his part of Austria for having the best crops. Nobody knew how he did it. And he found the guy stirring water, and that was where it comes in.
James Orphanast, Rotherham City University. Charles, you mentioned about how in no dig you don't then use chemicals, but what do you think about particularly larger scale arable, for example, where and in the US especially, they add glyphosate a lot in terms with what they call no-till, and that's a kind of major
Thank you very much for that question, because it serves to highlight something I'd like to mention, which is the gulf, the massive difference between what I call farming and gardening or market gardening. I feel those two worlds are astonishingly different, and they're often just lumped together under the term farming. And what I see, as you mentioned, with no-till, regenerative, whatever it might be called, um, those farmers on a big scale can't do like us or small-scale gardening. They can't go out and hand weed or lay cardboard on a thick lot of weeds. And so I'm not excusing it, but I'm saying they don't have recourse. It's not so simple. And a lot of them do use glyphosate. No-till doesn't mean no chemicals for sure. And in wet years, slug pellets as well come into it because of the wet mulch on top harboring slugs. Personally, I find I don't use any slug prevention at all like that. Just having a clean garden with very little surface debris, just compost on beds, wood chip on paths, so the soil is always covered, mulched, and that's great against slugs. So yeah, it's a good point.
Hi, Charles. I've known you a long time, and it's always interesting to hear, where you're heading and what might be happening. But you look to me, because my wife does a lot of shamanic work, and you look much more shamanic these days. You seem to be shamanic. You've gone into the shamanic world. It's like, yeah, it's really fascinating, and I sort of love the open-mindedness. And I'm a bit of a skeptic about chemtrails. I have to say, you mentioned them last year. It shocked a few of us commercial growers, but it's fine. I think we just need to be very open-minded. And what I like about you when you talk is you are very open-minded and very honest. And we've had some incredibly honest talks at this event. From Guy yesterday, and now from you. I just like the honesty that these sort of events bring out. And I thank you for your honesty.
Well, thank you very much. I got a nice anecdote about Guy. So Guy Watson. We've known each other for 40 years. Anyway, of all places, I happened to see him at a motorway service station. We both called in for some breakfast at Gloucester Services. I was going one way, he was going the other. And I went over to have a word, and we were talking about this, that, and the other. And then I said to him, I can't remember quite what triggered me to say it, but I said to him, by the way, you know that climate change is not real. There's And he said, but his reaction is what intrigued me. He said, "Oh, not you." And he kind of walked backwards like I had the plague. But I love that we can disagree. I think that's really important and have a debate about all these things. Yeah, Lawrence.
Hiya, interesting. Where do you fit on the shamanic scale, by the way, Pete? Or others here? Yeah, never thought about this before. Anyway, great. Thank
Lawrence,
you.
who are you? You haven't said.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm Lawrence Woodward. The hat this now is Sheep Grove Trust, and the reason Sheep Grove Trust is Sheep Grove Trust is one of the sponsors here, and somebody the other day talked about John Seymour's book Self Sufficiency as a kind of starting point for the or a dropping off point for the hippie movement and. The edition that John showed on the slide was actually produced by Dorling Kindersley. It's the biggest selling edition of John Seymour's thing, and the Kindersley family are Sheep Grove Trust. So there's a kind of real connection going right back through Sheep Grove and these ideas about holism and health and those kinds of connections. So thank you for picking all that up. As Pete said, yeah, the evolution of your thought is interesting. Others don't know, but you will remember that we worked together a long time on some ill-fated book. But anyway.
I remember being on an aeroplane with you in the 1980s going to conference in Ireland, for example, and Hardy Boatman.
Oh my God, yeah.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, I'd forgotten that. I was probably pissed, but anyway. It's my contribution to the shamanic world. The point, well, first of all, it's interesting, these kind of health connections. And I don't want to disagree with you at all. First of all, I want to say, actually, great about the soil and consumption of the soil. It's a well-known practice which people have forgotten in alternative animal treatment to dig pits for cattle, particularly, to go and eat soil when they're feeling ill. And they just do it when they feel like it. There's measurable benefits from cattle eating soil from an early age. And I remember actually eating soil in the garden. So it's great, and I'm glad you brought that up because it's interesting. I'd say I don't want to disagree with you because I do, but why don't you make a point, first of all, about the gut microbiome and the claims that the gut microbiome is 80% and whatever. That may be true. I'm not sure about the percentages. We should not forget the other key microbiomes in the body. And one of the key foundation stones of the organic concept of health came from dentists. And the awareness of health in the mouth and cavities was a critical, there was an alliance between alternative doctors and dentists. And they were part of the creation of the original organic movement. And there is a massive foundation, very influential, called the Western Price Association in the US, still going. And that was created by dentistry. And the impact of the microbiome in the mouth is really important. And I still meet people.
For those of you who don't know, that Western Price, isn't it?
Yes.
Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. It's an amazing book if you can get hold of it. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, thank you. And so as well as the processing of food and the minimal processing of keeping whole foods, there is a body of evidence, some alternative doctors who talk about the number of times you have to chew food in order to release that internal energy from all food, from non-chemical food particularly. So let's not get carried away with the gut microbiome, because the mouth and the nose actually also, and the skin. But the other point of the link between soil and gut microbiome, which comes back to a key point that I would like you to expand on, is actually going back. There is not. We shouldn't fall into the trap of believing that the makeup and the composition of the gut microbiome is exactly the same as in the soil. It's not. It's very different. There may be some connections that we don't understand in terms of populations of bacteria and microorganisms. There may well be. But I think, and this comes back to the point I'd like you to expand on, I believe increasingly that the link is to do with the energetic link between the microbial communities. It's not a direct sort of population relationship. It's to do with the flow of energy. And it's to do with the vitality of energy that flows through all living organisms. I think you alluded to that. And I think that is a key part of organic growing, particularly growing. It's been forgotten about in other areas as well of organic. But I think it's a key part that organic growers should be looking at. And looking at maintaining this energy spread, and looking about, you talked about diversity, looking at the diversity in terms of cropping, whether that's, as you say, a range of vegetables or you're using cover crops or whatever, but how that diversity of cropping in place affects the biodiversity and the resilience of the energy flows. And I suspect you've thought more about that, but so could you respond though? Tell me
Yeah,
I'm
I
talking
really
over
like
you,
that.
that's all right.
Thank you very much, because I think that's a wonderful thing that I'd like to find out more about myself. When you talk about the energy of the two biomes and how the soil biome energy, there's many ways, isn't there, of putting this? And for me, that's much more appealing than the pure scientific quantitative look at the bacterial composition of each biome, which I feel, like so much analytical science can end up being a bit sterile. So no, I'm really grateful for that.
Do you see that link? Do you see
Yeah.
that how
Yeah,
that might
makes
affect
sense.
like your operation in terms
Yeah.
of the diversity of crops that
Yeah.
you're growing?
Yeah, and there I find myself saying it makes sense, which I always love to hear. If anyone's giving me a comment of anything, or if I'm explaining something to somebody and they say it makes sense, I know that they've got it. It's like, so great, thanks.
Hello, I'm Pip. I'm a trainee on a market garden. When developing your approach to no-dig gardening, did you look at any historic influences or any influences from around the world at all? I'd be interested to hear about them.
Yeah, but this was when I started. It was before the internet, obviously, and there weren't a lot of easy references or practices to find. But the Soil Association old journals, which I was lucky enough to have access to from the 1940s, were and still are actually a massive hive of information. And there were people in those journals talking about no dig, but on a garden scale. The early Soil Association had more gardeners, I would say, compared to more recently. It was gardening and farming. So I was picking up ideas actually all over. Bruce Stout was probably the one that helped crystallize it. And there's a guy called F.C. King, who was a gardener in Cumbria in northwest England in the 1930s, 40s. And he wrote a book called a New Approach to Weeds in 1951, came out, Faber and Faber, like a lot of those wonderful old books. And he talked about a dig no dig trial he'd done in the 1940s, and he compared the results of what he called not digging, which was compost mulch actually, and it really inspired me because he was talking about the exuberance of growth when he didn't disturb the soil with compost mulch on top.
Hi, Charles. I'm Ollie. Kind of want to touch on, you said before about third-party verification and whether it's needed. And for what the chap said earlier about no dig using kind of chemicals, and how do you see if there is no third-party verification, what kind of replaces that?
Well, you could turn it around a bit and say, how might it be possible that we kind of make a world where it's not necessary? And that is a bit wishful thinking, or can sound wishful thinking, but I don't know is the answer. If the world stays as it is, with most people living in cities completely cut off from land and farming, how are they going to know how the food was produced? And there's a lot of misleading going on. People putting pretty farm pictures on packaging, as we know. So yeah, I don't know on the one hand, but what I would hope is that somehow things can be broken down a bit so that more people can have access to land. I know the LWA do fantastic work along those lines, and I feel that's where we really need to push.
Hi, I have a chemical-free walled garden, and if I go to Chipping Sobri farmers market, I might make £40 for 4 hours. If I go to Stroud farmers market, I make more like £1,000 in the 4 hours. So really, one lot are awake and the other lot are completely unaware. So what I want to appeal to you is that you will help me make these small reels. What are you doing? How and why you love it so? What is the hurdles and what are the solutions? So if you want to promote what you're doing so that people buy from you, we have to be better at PR. And so I want to offer you that opportunity to speak to camera. Thank you. If you're a grower.
Tracy's been around in the organic movement for a long time, 40 years more, and do take her up on her offer. It's just simply standing in the camera and giving a few thoughts on that.
Charles, just to follow up on the third-party verification, obviously I've asked you many times why you're not organic, and I think I've got a slight better picture now why you're not organic. However, I've been having a lot of conversations, and I sit on the producer board, sorry, at the Soil Association, and I advocate on behalf of OGA members, so 500 of our members. I'm advocating, on behalf of them in different forums. And I wouldn't like some of the young growers that are coming in to be put off by certification because I think it has a part to play with our system. I think you just touched upon that when you said, it's not the world that we possibly would like, and we have to work with what we've got. And I totally agree with you. I think in a perfect world, we would not need certification. I really do believe that. And I think I'm more or less on the same page with you as that. But I do know that it has a part to play when we're trying to sell to certain people, when we were trying to create a market for our produce. So I'm sort of, I'm caught between two stools here. It's not giving anything out, Charles. You'll be glad to know. It's a small plane. Anyway, no, I think I am caught, but I'm not quite sure what the question is, Charles. But I'm just interested that there are many small growers who I'm trying to get certification brought down, and they want to certify, and I don't think certification is perfect, by the way.
No, but could it be made more simple and less expensive?
Yeah, well, that's what we continually argue for, that it should be less expensive.
But also time needed. I hear horror stories about the amount of time none of us have spare time.
No, I agree with that, and that's something maybe I should be more cognizant of when I'm talking to the Soil Association and to OF&G, that should be. And the OGA needs to have this sort of input because the OGA is the face. We call ourselves the face of organic horticulture, So we do need to have these reference points, from yourself, from the Tollies of this world. We've had a spat about gardeners recently. I'm not going to go into that. It's just that the Boom Awards, awarded a gardener. I hope he's here, and I hope he's feeling included because actually he's doing great work for gardeners, but there is a certification issue, and we just need to be aware of that many growers are going through a lot of trouble to certify, I don't know what your views are.
When I started being organic certified in 1983, this guy came to my house. I don't remember him ever going out in the garden, actually. And we had a brief chat about things. It was clear that we were on the same page. I feel that actually that's a valid part of it. You can get a feeling from people that they're genuine. I almost feel that should be written down. If the inspector feels this person is genuine, that's a big box to tick. Anyway, within half an hour, he'd given me the certification without too much attention to detail. I'm not saying that's perfect, but somewhere between that and what we are now would be amazing.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I've got a no-dig area, quarter acre, as well as field scale, 7 acres. But I don't use cardboard. I can't really. I'm on, a very big organic farm, and I won't use cardboard. But I've made, I can work that out with tarps. I can use tarps to kill the grass. But I think, many of us as organic growers, we follow avidly what you do because actually some of the techniques are fantastic. They've been scaled up. We've got very big organic, people doing big organic no dig now, so it doesn't always work at a much bigger scale, but 2 or 3 acres.
Well, I'm just going to put a quick plug in for this. I'm not selling it, but so it's free. What I'd love it though, if any of you take it, just put a couple of pound in the donations box as you leave, to support this event because it's a great event, and there's ideas in there that can I'm sure can benefit you a lot for very little input of money, at least.
Charles, just pick up on that point. Do you think there's a size or a scale in terms of acreage at which no dig becomes unviable?
Yeah. Thing is, that question has, in a way, I feel has two questions in it. One is, what is no dig intensive market gardening? Because I feel that's what I'm doing, and that's what mostly I'm talking about, at least. I'm not talking about no dig growing wheat in a 50-acre field, for example, which needs a different approach. So it's not only about whether it's viable, it's about whether it's even something we should be trying to do. And I was approached 3 years ago now by a company from Denmark who were making robots to lay cardboard and spread compost mulch. And they said, would you mind if we used your name on the Charles robot? And I said, well, actually, I would, because for me, I feel that's turning a rather intimate process of handwork, which is part of it, into something more going towards being a bit industrial. So that's in a way is partly my answer to your question. That I don't think no dig, as I recommend it and do it, is scale upable beyond about an acre maybe. Because the other part of it is that it's all handwork. It fits in very nicely with selling high value products. That's mostly what I'm doing. So I'm not selling many potatoes, for example. I grow potatoes just for home use. Really value them for that. There's no doubt about it. But the current prices, I can't afford to sell them and lose even more money. So no dig, as I'm recommending it, is for high value leaf crops, mostly salad, vegetables, spinach, chard, kale, herbs, and certain number of carrots. You know, we if you can find the right market, we've been selling this year a lot of carrots with tops on to a local pub, and they're using the tops to make carrot top pesto, for example. So it's also about finding markets that want that kind of produce that we can offer as small growers. We're more flexible. We can do things that, there's more dialogue now, which really heartens me, between us and chefs. And I used to find chefs really difficult. Some of them I still find really difficult. Like it's not their fault, but it's where they've been trained. It's all about meat and fish and vegetables as the sides, which is, I think, a pretty derogatory term. And then, actually, funny enough, near me recently has opened the Newt. Have any of you heard of the Newt? It's the ultimate in upper end gardening and resort. Garden resort would be probably the best phrase for it. But in their restaurant there, the owners are quite enlightened, and the way they phrase it on the menu is pumpkin pie, side is roast beef. And I think, words, it's actually is highly significant. And so that, for me, that's a really important, this leap that's been made. And if we can engage more with chefs and get them on board, I'm finding there are a lot of chefs. A lot of chefs want to run a market garden. Then they realize, God, this takes so much time, I couldn't possibly do it. So then they value us more for putting in the time to grow the vegetables and just getting that kind of dialogue going and a mutual appreciation. And I know that Tolly made a saying once, I think, about he didn't want to supply chefs because they throw most of it away. I totally get that. But, if you can get the true chef, who wants to cook vegetables, it's potentially a really good market, I think.
He's going back a bit to the certification, so I'm not sure whether you want to move on. I can link it to that, but
to the what? Sorry, Lawrence?
Oh, no, sorry. No, I'm looking. I'm looking at because I wanted to follow on the certification. Sorry, I wanted to follow on the certification, but if you moved on, I can leave it. Okay, so the
got 1 minute.
The question of third-party certification and its difficulties is critically important, as Pete said. A group of us with OGA, Organic Growers Alliance, LWA, and the CSA network have been seeking to develop an alternative, which is called participatory certification or peer review certification, which would work only in a local area for a small number of growers in a local area with very similar growing conditions. It's not third-party certification, so essentially the groups of growers and ideally their customers work together in a network to essentially self-certify. The beauty of it is that It's an improvement program because growers can learn from each other. It's an education program because if you involve the customers, they can learn. But it's not cheap because I hear so many growers tell me we don't need certification. And when we were developing standards were only developed for places where the customers couldn't go and visit the grower, where the grower could have face-to-face contact with the customers. So there's absolutely no reason for third-party certification. However, passing information from the grower to the customer or buyer, whatever, is not a cheap option. It's incredibly expensive in terms of time and energy for the grower to do. And we haven't cracked this yet. I get growers who tell me, yeah, the customers can come and talk to us. But actually they don't because they've got no time. A customer can't turn up and say, well, how have you chosen this variety? It'll drive the growers crazy. So we have to find a system where that exchange of information actually happens on a level playing field.
Okay, there are hundreds of WhatsApp groups.
Well, yeah. But of course, buyers like to come round and they like to talk to the growers and like to see things growing. Which then leads to another question, is how you define things, whether all the growers are growing the same thing, which is why the important thing is the same growers working together in the same region, so there's a similarity. And that's a critical thing. So this is very slow progress, dealing with all this kind of stuff. But in theory, we can do away with third-party certification for those kinds of local connections, but we have to work out on those local connections, and we have to agree on certain things that we've avoided. Like, if somebody says, I'm not certified, but I'm growing with organic principles. Well, which principles? This one, not that one, How are you working that out? I'm doing no dig and I'm using compost for weed control. Well, how much compost are you using for weed control? Because obviously compost is also a nutrient source. So those things we have to crack, but we have to have, as you said, transparent, open conversations. It's not an easy option to do this. But I think a grower community like LWA, like CSAs, can work on this together. And while it's also critically important for food security and for developing a truly alternative food system that is embedded in trust and exchange of information, and a resilient one that is a true alternative to this system that we've got.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that's a good note to finish on, actually. When you said food security, all of us can really help with that, and we are making a difference already. If we can grow more healthy food for our locality, that's a win, because it's pretty precarious times we're heading for, there's no doubt about it.
Yes. Thank you so much, Charles, but also all the questioners. I think it really has been a fascinating discussion, and it is actually one of the most critical issues at the moment, this whole thing about small grower certification or participatory group certification. And I was just wondering, after what you said, Lawrence, whether one of the requirements could be in these groups that each grower has an open day once a year, and that could revolve around each month somebody could have an open day for customers, and then the customers could come and they would gradually get to learn a lot more through being able to go and visit a farm every month. The growers could go to them, and it could really build solidarity and understanding. And yes, I really hope we can work more on this over the next year. So thank you everyone who's contributed questions, and thank you very much, Charles. It's been a really good session.
Come and get your coffee.